Imagine you are standing in the middle of a wind-blown desert. Archaeologists have just carefully excavated a prehistoric human skeleton. The skull of the victim is fractured, and right next to it is a sharp stone point. Did this man die in a war? It is very possible. But it is also possible he was killed in an argument, ambushed, avenged, robbed, or, unluckily, died in a minor skirmish between two groups of people. Archaeologists can easily dig up evidence of violence, but they can never dig up an invisible thing called intent. And that is exactly the reason why the question, when did humans invent war, is much more difficult than the question of when humans invented weapons. Why did humans start wars? First, we need to be clear. A murder is not a war. An individual killing an individual usually stems from jealousy, property disputes, or personal conflicts. A blood feud between two families is also not a war. Even a small group suddenly attacking another group to loot or kidnap only stops at isolated raids. War, at its most basic level, requires a level of organized, coordinated, and expanded violence far beyond isolated personal disputes. If we bundle all violent behaviors together and label them as war, we will accidentally make the human past look much more belligerent and bloodthirsty than reality. Up until now, archaeological records have been filled with skull fractures, blunt force traumas, or wounds from projectile weapons. However, a damaged skeleton only says that a person was injured or killed. It does not automatically prove that two societies were in a state of war. To conclude the existence of war, archaeologists need a much broader pattern, a series of victims with the same type of wound, mass graves, traces of burning, destruction, or solid defense structures. And one of the places where prehistoric violence is most visible is located in the Nile Valley. The Jebel Sahaba cemetery dates back at least 13,400 years. Here, there are 61 buried skeletons. A reanalysis in 2021 discovered over 100 horrifying wounds, with a large proportion related to lethal weapons. Most notably, about 1/4 of the victims carried on their bodies both fully healed wounds and fresh, fatal wounds. Initially, people easily imagined this as the remnants of a disastrous ancient battle, but reality exposed a much more complex story. The study authors rejected the idea that this was a single great battle. Instead, it was more like skirmishes, raids, and ambushes repeated over time. Imagine a person surviving after having a spear pierce through their flesh. The wound took months to heal completely, but many years later, he was attacked again, and this time, he did not survive. Jebel Sahaba does not reflect a single day of war. It reflects a world where violence could return at any moment. So why did our ancestors slaughter each other? The study at Jebel Sahaba hypothesized that at the end of the Paleolithic era, the Nile Valley went through severe climate fluctuations. Hunter-gatherer groups were cornered and had to compete more fiercely to survive in areas with increasingly depleting resources. Climate instability led to food scarcity, pushed population density to concentrate, exploded competition, and ultimately led to violence. But the important thing is, does resource scarcity equate to war? The answer is not necessarily. Facing starvation, humans could absolutely choose to migrate, trade, share food, or even merge with other groups of people. Resource scarcity creates a massive pressure, but it does not automatically trigger war. If deprivation created war, then why did not every famine in history lead to bloody wars? This brings us to a breakthrough hypothesis. Perhaps war requires a combination of many factors. Not only needing something worth fighting for, but more importantly, humans need something worth protecting. A hunter-gatherer group could absolutely walk away when the food source runs out. But what would happen if they were holding an excellent fishing area, an abundant water source, stored food reserves, fertile fields, or a large herd of livestock? The denser, more predictable, and harder to move the resources are, the more valuable that territory becomes. Economic and anthropological models all indicate that it is exactly these fixed resource packages that are the kindling, igniting territorial competition. Let us go to the shores of Lake Turkana about 10,000 years ago. At the Nataruk site, archaeologists found 12 skeletons. 10 of those people had clear signs of a violent death, from traumatic brain injuries, penetrating weapon wounds, to stone tools still firmly embedded in the bones. The research team in 2016 explained this event as a case of violence between hunter-gatherer groups, proving that war had been in the behavioral vocabulary of humans long before we knew how to do agriculture. This is a heavy blow to the simple historical story we usually hear, that agriculture created war. If the conclusion at Nataruk is correct, highly lethal organized violence between groups of people could have existed even before agriculture was born. But the Nataruk event is also exactly the reason why we must be cautious. Right after publication, many other researchers questioned this interpretation. They doubted whether all those skeletons really died in the same event, or whether the evidence was strong enough to conclude this was a war-related massacre. The Nataruk site is the most vivid proof, showing that even the most famous evidence of prehistoric war is incredibly difficult to identify and easily debated. And that is when a major plot twist appears. Perhaps the question of when war began was already a wrong question. There will never be a stone stele with the inscription, "War was invented in the year 10,000 before Christ." The more reasonable possibility is that violence between groups of people could appear, disappear, then reappear, depending on ecological and social conditions. War might not be an invention. It might just be a brutal strategy that humans will use when conditions begin to make it feasible or beneficial. So, what did agriculture change? Agriculture did not need to invent war, but farming usually brings a completely new package of conditions. Sedentism forces people to be tightly tied to the village. Ownership over land, granaries, and livestock is born. Population density skyrockets, causing many people to live squeezed together. The surplus of wealth creates things worth looting and worth protecting. And along with that is social differentiation, creating groups capable of mobilizing human resources on a large scale. A hunter could lose a hunting spot and go look elsewhere, but if a farmer loses his food storage, he will lose an entire winter. As settlements grew larger and conflicts began leaving behind more and more corpses, the phantom of war finally became clearly visible in the archaeological records. At the mass burial site of Schöneck-Kilienstatten in Germany, people found at least 26 individuals suffering from blunt force trauma, arrow wounds, and systematically broken lower limbs. Researchers view this as undeniable evidence of lethal collective violence on a large scale. And war is not just a single day of slashing each other. At a site in Spain around over 3,000 years before Christ, analysis on over 300 individuals showed dozens of wounds, both healed and unhealed. The strongest trauma characteristics fell upon adult males. Researchers suggest this pattern is consistent with an ongoing conflict lasting for many months, even many years, instead of just a lightning-fast massacre. By this stage, war is no longer a large-scale murder. It has become a social condition, destroying food production, spreading malnutrition, and draining the vitality of an entire community. But does that mean humans are born as belligerent beings? There are two extreme views. One side argues that war is in our genes. The other side romanticizes that humans originally lived peacefully until agriculture appeared and caused us to fall. Both views are too simple. Studies on nomadic hunter-gatherer societies show that the majority of violence is personal in nature, while war only accounts for a small percentage. However, sites like Nataruk or Jebel Sahaba prove that some hunter-gatherer groups had to go through incredibly bloody, violent clashes. The most solid scientific conclusion is that humans have the capacity to create coalitionary violence. But having the capacity does not mean that it will certainly happen. So, what turned a tiny dispute into a devastating war? There is no single cause. War is like a convergence model. It begins when a group of people forms an identity, clearly distinguishing between us and them. Next, there must be resources or territory worth protecting or worth looting. Along with that, the cost of walking away must be high enough. And most importantly, that group must have the ability to coordinate planning, ally, and craft weapons. Violence gradually escalates from a raid to revenge, becoming a blood feud, and finally exploding into war. But please remember carefully, even with all the above factors converging, war is still not a certainty. Besides the capacity for slaughter, humans also possess excellent tools to prevent war, such as diplomacy, marriage alliances, trade, or reconciliation rituals. Returning to the skeleton in the desert at the beginning of the video, we always crave for archaeology to answer the question, is human nature ultimately violent or peace-loving? But archaeology only quietly answers that both are possible. There are places where violence is extremely rare, but there are also places where horrifying massacres and sustained organized conflicts occurred. Prehistory does not paint a simple human nature. It proves that human behavior can change incredibly drastically, depending on the environment and how we organize society. The truth is, war did not suddenly appear when humans invented weapons. Weapons only made organized slaughter easier. But a spear, lying still on the ground, can never create a war by itself. A spear can be used to hunt deer, can be used for self-defense, and can also be taken by a group of people to raid a village. War needs humans willing to act as a unified bloc against another unified bloc. Why did humans start wars? It is not because one fine day humanity suddenly became evil. It is not because agriculture brainwashed gentle farmers into bloodthirsty warriors. And it is also not because war has been something permanently present throughout the length of history at the same level. Humanity probably began to wage war when conflicts stopped being contained between individuals and transformed into hatred between groups of people. Groups of people capable of protecting territory, remembering enemies, coordinating attacks, and passing down hatred through many generations. Humans did not need to invent violence. We just needed to learn how to organize it. War might not be an ancient invention hidden away somewhere in the Stone Age. War, brutally enough, is exactly what happens when the most wonderful cooperative ability of humanity is turned backward to fight against another group of people.